Hi everyone, I'd just like to acknowledge that we're on Wajak Noongar Butcher and to pay my respects and to say hi. I'm Helen Simondson, and as said, I'm currently the manager here at the WA Museum Boola Bardip. So my role here fundamentally looks after everything from how do we get the waste off the site, how do we manage staff and front of house staff, and programming as well. So it's and retail and commercial. So it's a sort of real breadth role, which was an interesting choice for me at the time, given that I had been at ACMI for a long time, and I was originally head of public and education programs there, having come through sort of creative, choreographic actually, original background in dance, moved into film and then ended up in screen culture. And then this role came up with this extraordinary building, and I threw my hat in the ring. And for my sins, I'm here now in Western Australia and really enjoying the breadth of the role, albeit a bit exhausted now and then. So for me, it's a kind of interesting collection of all the skills that I have. From the organisational perspective, the organisation has been happy to have people who are more sort of digitally kind of literate and thinking more digitally in what is a fairly conservative museum where predominantly objects and didactics are sort of the way they move forward. So it's that new era of how to think about museums, which is quite interesting. And Gemma, who we met originally while we see each other here in Western Australia in ACMI. So after I was head of public programs, I moved across to ACMI X, and it was to really found it with Katrina Sedgwick, who was the director at the time, and also Peter Tullen, who runs the Remix. So it was the very first co-working space in a cultural institution in Australia. There were a few models internationally when it was first established. And what was particular about the model was it was what's called a co-location model. No cultural institutions were doing it. It was their staff were here. A co-working space was way over somewhere else. And there was very little conversation between staff and creatives, whereas this idea was to make sure that we all sat together. So we literally did that, and Gemma was part of the ACMI X, and that was where her office space was. So the idea was those organic conversations were two-way. It was great for the artists to understand where institutions' challenges lie, and for the institution it was great to spend time with artists and have those really organic conversations early in the piece before minds get set and ideas get set and kind of traverse a particular way. So it was a really great initiative, and ACMI still has ACMI X, and they are literally all together in that same working space. So, you know, there was a really good coffee machine, great area to have your lunch, lots of ways to have conversations, and a massive big program to support the industry in continuing to develop. Because if you think about it, interestingly for Western Australia, it is the beginnings of what's called creative industries. It's the first time there's a creative industry policy. And for most of you go, yeah, what does creative industry policy mean? But what it means is a much better, thoughtful pipeline for those creatives moving into sort of thinking about themselves as businesses and how those opportunities arise. So it really fits into that creative industries model that an institution would actually work with its, with the industry together. And in that co-working space, there was also Melbourne University, RMIT and Swinburne, and they were researchers alongside. So it was that idea that you would hothouse conversations. You'd think about yourself, if you were a programmer, you'd have different ways to have a dialogue and you'd be informing each other all the way through, which was, I think, incredibly important. And, you know, coming into a more traditional organisation, and it's brilliant, so I say this with all of those things that you say about an organisation, it's way more siloed than where I have come from, and those are the sorts of initiatives that are really critical, I think, moving forward. And the new minister with the new government is now, the portfolio is creative industry, so it's a very That's incredibly useful for everybody in this room, that idea of the shift to creative industries and to what it might consider and what it might bring for practice and future opportunities as it rolls forward. So I think it's a kind of a watershed moment. And for those who, Queensland and Victoria are very strong creative industries, probably before New South Wales, are a bit slower. And WA is just starting now, but that's always exciting. Like, that's where the opportunities begin. And the games industry, for instance, does very, very well in a creative industries environment, as does screen-based content, including immersive things. So I think overall that sort of bigger policy thinking is worthwhile, kind of getting your head around as well, even if your interest is more in as an individual artist working, I guess. And today we thought I'd bring Gemma along because we will, in the body of the discussion, speak a little bit to some of the ACMI X programs we did that were really useful, and that was to look at the startup industry and to kind of take the understandings of startup and start to apply them across into a creative context to see what we could use from that. And then Gemma was part of the ACMI Accelerator and has gone on to do other accelerators. She's an accelerator queen. And we were given quite a bit of funding to do that. First of all, I went out to Launch Victoria, which was an organisation where they were supporting startups, and said, creative tech, creatives, that's, there's an industry there. And they went, there is, let's fund the first accelerator. And then Creative Victoria, which is the same as DLGSC here, saw the outcome and the focus of the accelerator and went, we're going to support that, and then put, about 1.2 or 1.5 million to do more of those to support artists in developing skills in a format, in a way that made sense to them. So that's the kind of underpinning in which we're going to discuss today, which will get us to commissions and funding and those kind of things, but it's actually about a mindset and thinking slightly differently. If you're already doing this, apologies if this is sort of, that stuff I've been doing for a while, but I guess most importantly for us is that we found that everybody gained something in looking at that cross-sector stuff. What was the startup doing? What could I apply that wasn't, just that hustle language of startup? I mean, that was pretty hysterical, the startup world. They have the best business card titles. Concierge of Happiness is a startup title. Enabler of Awesomeness is another. That was George Hedden from Pause. That was his business card title. And my other favourite was Surprise Attack Architect, which was marketing, believe it or not. So there we go. The fun about working in the startup world, you can invent whatever you damn well want for your title, really. So that kind of gives me a quick intro to introduce Gemma, and she'll talk a little bit about her company, and then we'll go into a bigger discussion around the startup kind of ideas and thinking, and then we're going to get you to do a little exercise in little groups, and then that'll be about it. An hour will be up before we know it. And ask questions all the way through.
Yeah, totally. So I have come from a theatre background, so spent 25 years kind of touring theatre works and doing large-scale festivals and events and so on. And so a number of years ago, through my sister's company, Side Pony Productions, we developed the work The Confidence Man, which was an immersive theatre experience where 6 members of the audience got given a mask and a pair of headphones, and then they were the characters in the story. So Side Pony is a West Australian company. Some of you may have been in or seen that work. So that was actually initially developed with Pika in the old Pika performance space. And through that work, we kind of developed this model of inviting audience members in, having a very intimate experience where they are hearing the story in the first person, playing out the action, like physically role-playing a 45-minute crime thriller with drug deal gone wrong and kidnapping and all that sort of stuff. And off the back of that, we kind of looked at, well, how this is the bones of this experience really boil down to the audio. And the audio is highly mobile. How can we take the framework of what we've created here and shift it into new paradigms, basically? And also in the process, we went from having huge amounts of like old school tech with cables and devices and so on, through to building an app that helped us to deliver that audio. So Audioplay, which is the company that my sister and I and our software developer Ari have evolved from that, takes the mechanics of that type of experience. So basically, having every player have a pair of headphones, they're listening to the story, but they're physically acting out the story, creating that story world in real life kind of thing. And so in that transition, we also kind of went, well, adults seem to really hate audience participation. They need a few drinks before they're up for it, whereas any 10-year-old, if you go to them and say, do you want to play? They are in. So responding to our audiences and looking for where the opportunities were to invite those audiences in, we kind of changed tact and started developing experiences for children. So Audioplay creates experiences for 6 to 12-year-olds. And in so doing, obviously shifted the nature of the content. We weren't going to do crime thrillers with drug deals for 12-year-olds. Shame. So we started working into the kids space, but I didn't have experience in kids work, so I brought a very adult sensibility to it. And so learning that new market, learning how we were creating works using this framework has been a really interesting process around understanding your audience and iterating through that process. And then off the back of that, we've essentially created Audioplay. So Audioplay has a few different distribution mechanisms. So on one hand, we create games that are designed for kids to play at home. So families can download an experience. It's designed for 1 or 2 players because that is an easy number of players to get together in a family or in a household. And we've sort of looked at how can we essentially shift from a theatrical space where we need to book in a time and have all the gear and have the presenter on board to then go, well, this could go anywhere, but how do we then also make the experience adaptable to anywhere? So as families download the experience, we've designed them so that they use the architecture of the home. So they might be moving from the bedroom to the lounge room to the kitchen. And the players are also using very familiar household items. Like we'll get them to find 3 spoons from the drawer, and they're going to use cushions, or they're going to find bald socks in their drawer, that kind of thing. So we're using those objects and then imbuing them in the story. So the socks from the drawer may be the special eggs of the dinosaur that they've got to go and rescue. So we're kind of incorporating very physical elements into the story. So that software is designed to be downloaded through Google Play and the App Store. So anywhere in the world can download those experiences and play them at home. We also have a distribution mechanism which is working B2B. So working through pitching to museums, children's festivals, theatres, libraries, where they can essentially either order a kit of equipment or download the software to run on their own equipment. Their groups, their experience is designed for 4 players, so it's got a higher capacity, which often an institution will want a higher capacity to service their audience. And we're selling into those institutions who might run a program with half-hour sessions throughout the day over a school holiday, for instance. So it's the same target audience. It's leaning into those same story worlds, but we've got different SKUs of those experiences depending on the audience, the customer that we're servicing. And so Audioplay's been creating this software for many years now. And so in doing so, we've managed to secure a bunch of awards and also managed to patent the software that we've developed in the US and Australia, which, coming from an arts background, it's like, oh, actual patents, that's interesting. So that's sort of a snapshot of like what Audioplay has been developing over that period of time. Yeah, we might even have a little look.
Yeah.
Oh yes, do. With a little sizzle reel.
You need somewhere to hide now!
It's like real video game, but we're doing it with imagination too.
Work together to get set up. Get one of the blankets and put it over the chair.
Just fry the pigs!
Audioplay lets you step into the story and be the character that you love. So each player is hearing the audio from their own character's point of view.
Come get him, Abby, that parrot is swooping you!
Shall we begin the test?
Yeah, bring it on.
I will describe it as a game, but not as a game you play, as a game you listen to. Oh, shh, what are you doing?
Who's that? Turn it!
Give Leo a pooey high five.
Sign up at audioplay.me to find out more.
You can come out of your cave now. We won't hurt you.
That's kind of the types of companies that were coming into the accelerator. Some were possibly less advanced in terms of software, were creators and theatre makers, and essentially interested in fundamentally developing something more digital that could be repeatable. So it's just that sort of economic model. I'm in a situation where if I have to put on live events, I have to do it from the ground up. I only have capacity, which is whatever the audience is. I've got to get a whole host of infrastructure around me to support that. So how do people start thinking about their skills and the area of their art form? How does that become a digital product? So it was a lot of confronting thinking we did in terms of bringing people along the journey of let's explore the idea of startup, because they just use words like product, customer, B2C. So B2B, business to business, B2C, many of you will know these terms, but for creatives that was just like, really? Okay, all right. But it was worth pursuing, and it was worth looking at what were the elements that were fundamentals that could be transferred, and as a great way to kind of build some commercial muscle in creatives without having to go through a business course 101, something that is practical, that's my own project that I'm thinking and taking through in a business accelerator, and I'm going to really stretch myself and consider the fundamentals in a business perspective, again, without having to go and do some kind of business course. Or always rely on a producer. That's the producer's role, that's not my role. And as we go into the world, there's not always those opportunities to line up with producers, and in many ways empowering the artist to think a little more commercially is really useful. For some artists, it's not a journey they want to take, absolutely fine, that's not the point. The point is, for those that are interested, there's some great lessons learned in the startup world. Once you take the slight misogyny that's there, the bro culture, and you take away all the layers, in the end, they're really similar to a creative industry journey in terms of starting with nothing, because the fundamentals of a startup is you're not backed by anyone, you don't have big marketing money, you can't tell the world you must have this product, you've got to design a product that the world wants, is the premise in a startup methodology and a startup thinking. The issue with that, if you're a creative, is, well, I don't initiate from market, I initiate from creativity. And the position we got to, I guess, going through, and I'll just throw to Gemma in a second, was that getting some fundamentals right first means the moment you start departing creatively, you've actually got a framework in which to be more likely to land in a commercial setting if you've just done that work to begin before you start thinking about it creatively. So that was useful to loads. For some it was just like, no, really, can't do it. That's not how my brain thinks. I don't want to think that way. And there's plenty of room not to have to go down that pathway, but there's some merits in thinking carefully around what's the infrastructure available, what are people making decisions about when they commission, what are venues around me got and what are they making, what are their challenges. I need to understand their challenges in order to think about the kind of work I might create. So it's a sort of a different flip, but a really critical and essential flip. So flipping to Gemma, she did our accelerator, but she's done more than just one accelerator. I called her the accelerator queen this morning over coffee. Do you want to talk a bit about some of the accelerators you've done?
Yeah, like there's lots of different support programs, and so I think we hung out a lot in Fishburn, is in Sydney, and then the ACMI X program, which was like a 3-month intensive sort of was a program that included kind of more generalised lessons on the basics of startups and kind of business and so on, but also a lot of more in-depth coaching and support where you're actually applying that to your creative practice and looking at how you can look at the rigour of how you're approaching both your creative work and the way that your creative work is then going to actually connect with a presenter or an audience. The Createch program through the Australia Council, Creative Australia, and Sound Hub, which is in Denmark, where they had a program supporting sound-based businesses, which was supported through the Bang & Olufsen former R&D department. So a lot of these programs have very similar fundamentals that they're covering, but it was really interesting having experienced a number of those different processes, seeing the impact of how it's one thing to kind of get conceptually how all these things work and the principles of it and how you might apply it, but it's like actually getting into the weeds of how do I think of my customers? How do I think about the market for my product? Which is all quite icky language often when you come from a space where it's like, I just want to make really amazing experiences for audiences. But also, like, you can make the most amazing experience in the world, but if no one ever comes to see it and no one ever, you can't convince a presenter to present that, then you aren't going to be able to connect with your audience. So there's some elements in there where you really need to understand all the components that you need to be able to get your work on, and then understand, say, for the theatre company that's going to take your work, what are the imperatives that are driving them? How is it that you find that nexus, and how can you do that before you've gone and spent the last 10 years of your life making the most genius thing in the world that's actually not going to have a presenter at the end of it? So each of these programs sort of covers that stuff, but often it's about finding the right fit for you, where those lessons are really landing and you're like, oh, I can see how I'm supposed to adjust my practice so I'm actually really, the rubber hits the road and you're shifting the way that you work to actually apply that stuff.
And when at ACMI, because I was running ACMI X at the time, I could see in the world of startup that they had incubators and then they had accelerators, and we made a decision to do an accelerator because that was just much more business coaching, and it was where investors wanted to look. They didn't care about an incubator. That was early trialling ideas, so it was very rare to get investors to an incubator, but they would come to an accelerator. And most of them, if you haven't gone to a startup pitch night, they're worth going. They're a lot of fun. It's like an entertainment in itself. They are, you just see some of these new companies that are coming through, some really great, kind of in the renewals area. They're really interesting, some of the products they're creating and some of the pitches they do, just how they see themselves, how they define themselves and how they get cut through. They're all fabulous opportunities, but we chose and accelerated because we also wanted to see where were the investors, because that is another form of income that isn't really tapped for creative industries. But if you think about it, something like Canva, West Australian person developed Canva, is one of the biggest startup success stories, and it came from solving a problem that people wanted and had lots of rounds of investment. And for most of the people, including myself, I had no idea what those investment rounds meant or what they were about. So all of that was about an education for all of us, learning. We were all in it together talking about the creative saying, well, that stuff doesn't work for me, but this does. This makes no sense. Can we change the language here? What can we do to modify? Because there's a world out there of investment that is not tapped into from creative industries, and particularly around creative tech. There's some of the big things coming through, and that is a whole quantum that we possibly don't have to worry about right now, but that's where incredibly big investment can happen. And it is really about understanding you can create products. So a lot of the theatre practitioners, Gemma was way down the pathway, but when we did Foundry, which was with Creative Vic, there were people who were less along the pathway of digital thinking or product thinking. They were people who had just that challenge. I think about Threshold. They make theatre in regional Victoria. The audiences love them, but all 25 of them love it. It's just that stuff where they were just, circling around these very small audiences. They couldn't kind of do anything with it. And then they started creating these beautiful theatrical experiences that people could buy in their families for Mother's Day and Father's Day and Guardian's Day and all sorts of stuff like that, that all of a sudden just shifted their thinking. And then once they went through that, then they're working in commissions as sort of immersive theatre, which was just a journey they had never thought through. So that was just, that's some background. One of the first things we do in that, we're going to do an exercise today, which we call market sizing. In the market is really the first step you need to do is sort of understand broadly what the market is, what immersive industries are and cover. I'm assuming over now that we're in day 2, you've probably heard lots of different examples of what the immersive industry is. But when they talk about this, multi-trillion-dollar industry that is building, stats that I think maybe even Lucy shared, and certainly Remix, Peter Tullen has done a really great research paper on immersive that you can find online, and that's him scoping the entire immersive industry. Is that within that is going to be theme parks, and there are going to be all sorts of stuff that don't relate. That doesn't matter. It just means there is a big, massive audience with an interest in immersive, and that there are places to find yourself within that broader spectrum, and that is always really important to understand, and that industry is just doing nothing but grow. One of the stats which got it, into, that was a pre-COVID stat, the $8.2 trillion industry by 2028, which is not far. That's sort of big numbers in terms of what the value of an industry is. Most of those are about people want immersive experiences. That is certainly millennials and Gen Z prefer that than buying material objects. That's kind of that kind of research. So there is an audience and an expectation. And as I sit here, we are just building an immersive gallery on the top of Jubilee upstairs. That's where the VR Kimberley currently is in. And then when that comes down, we're doing a bit of fit out, and ultimately we're building an immersive gallery for single-based works, whether it be VR, whether it be, multi-screened, and that will be a multi-purpose space that I'm working on currently and just doing some fit-out stuff for. And I would say every institution that I know is doing the same. So there are immersive galleries being built everywhere, and yeah.
Well, I was just wanting to clarify, just like when we talk about the, like, I guess the $1 trillion, value. I guess is that just because I'm intrigued around like profit margins versus investments and I guess stock market and things like that. Because I feel like there's a big push for virtual reality and immersive experience to enter the home, but it's still all this research funding development is still being kind of brought up in this gallery environment. And I was just wondering, like, is this value figure, like, I guess, is it just more around the stock market and its anticipation for this industry to blow up at home and within the consumer market?
Yeah, I can't tell you what the granular is on that kind of figure, but when a industry grows, it usually will be that it's gone into the domestic market, and that's where the big numbers are. But in the context of you as practitioners, what you're looking at is what are the institutions that are around and what is that infrastructure doing in the change in an industry like that. That's what you're mapping. So while that might be that, that seems an enormous amount and that a lot of that will be attached to home use, I know where we are here in the museum, there are a lot of people that are not taking up VR at home. They're coming in and having experiences. And the other data that was in part of the remix, so Peter Tullen did one for British Council, and it's really thorough around what's new, what's happening. And some of that is, the friends experience and all of those kind of things that are particular, and, I suspect everyone in this room is not particularly interested in any of that, but it is the breadth of what that industry is, and what it's saying is people are really engaging with that immersive physical experience. And I mean, a great example for me is that we don't often get to do market research. We're doing some market research just in December while Rome was on, with a whole bunch of groups with a market research company to get some data about some directions we were going with certain things. And it was, I can tell you, everybody, so there was people under 30 was one group, people with young children was another, people with older children, and the empty nesters were the groups we researched, and every one of them knew about, because we were asking scaffold questions to get to what we wanted to know about some details, and every one of them knew their own experience, like they'd seen it, they'd heard about it, the word of mouth was massive, and these were sort of general people coming in for research. So I think that tells you a lot about the immersive experience in terms of what people are engaging with currently. So I guess that's where it's at. So so I guess, and so investors are looking for what are those experiences. So the investors that invested in Canva are very happy. They've probably, they've got no problems now in life. They're very looked after. So, there are those creative tech products and coming through all the time. And, what was wonderful about the ACMI X Excel is that we had people working on, screen-based live rendering tools to do sports broadcast right through to Audioplay, and, to somebody making an app at the time that was using AI, very early generation of AI. So really interesting creative thinking to get to those products as well. But anyway, knowing the immersive market is really the beginning of that. But I guess one of the questions we wanted to talk about was, that it is booming and that there is growth, and it's the creatives that need to be in that growth, because that's where your skill sets are the strongest, is, inventing ideas, thinking about things, and content. So I can put my hand up and say, and you'll all go, but I've got great content, why? And we'll get to that, where the kind of matching what organisations need is that our biggest challenge from an institutional perspective is, where is the content? It's not there. And that's sometimes because there's a whole host of things, because, and that is because funding is trying to catch up with the needs for new technology and not funding artists accordingly. Totally get that. There is, only so much content that are being produced and tested. It's hard working in creative tech because there's some infrastructure requirements that you need. There's different partnerships that you need to build the content that you're building. There are a whole host of those issues that are required that you need to navigate. But at the moment, the challenge, which is the opportunity for you guys, is that there's infrastructure coming on board all the time. There's new spaces being built, and there needs to be, at the end of the day, there needs to be quality content to fill them.
Holly, I was just wondering if you have any plans to do accelerators and stuff for more technical people to build out the technical infrastructure, because I do see a lot of places popping up with the physical infrastructure, but they don't have all of the infrastructure for the content creators to then come and put their stuff on the technical stuff.
Yeah. That's absolutely exactly right. And I think when I talked about it before, I might not be able to say I've got the answer for you because I'm working in a particular context. But the point with a creative industries policy more broadly is it's more likely that those kinds of programs will fit in to a creative industries policy. So it is actually really good news that the state has moved into a creative industries thinking, and the potential of that is remarkable, and the long-term impact of that will be great. And that doesn't mean that the older, more philanthropic kind of style of funding won't be available. It will be available, but it's about helping the industry get its ecosystem right to properly support people as they go through, and those things like accelerators are part of that.
Yeah, just picking up on some of that about infrastructure, and I feel like there's a sense of hearing about ACMI X and this sense of frustration and disappointment that we don't have something similar to it here. And just thinking about what you're saying in terms of new minister and creative industries, is there an opportunity to begin to push for more advocacy towards, co-working spaces where we can start to generate, cross collaborations and skill sharing, because it's really lacking. And I think having infrastructure or galleries for the product, but what about the process of generating the ideas in the first place and nesting artists together to be able to come up with stuff?
Correct, and you're absolutely right. When we were talking about it before, this conversation is not about product, it's actually about process in a way, because they're the sorts of thinking that need to happen, and there absolutely should be more of what Pika is doing here today. They're exactly the right sorts of things to do. Coalesce, bring the resources together, have those conversations, understand, and it might not result in you getting a commission, but you're going to know more, you're going to understand the network, you're going to find more people to talk to, and that will keep you on your journey. And I couldn't agree with you more that sort of accelerator incubator model, as you're growing and as those things, and bringing institutions into that, because they do hold the infrastructure, I'll say that, that is very true, and being open to how that will work. And part of the learning, because we're going to talk a bit now, and I think it's probably worth us saying, because it's what are the challenges in this sort of thinking. More about that, you know about what that is. So this is just to keep us on size really, rather than PowerPoint. So the challenges are that you might make amazing work, and it's it's an interactive VR, but in honesty, and having I got to curate To the Moon, which was the exhibition before the current one, Spinifex. The Spinifex one is brilliant, by the way. Do go in and pop in and see it. And what became a test was we had some interactive VR, existing VR, because we were needing, space, the ISS title where you're trading on space. That became the visitors just lined up for the VR and did nothing else within the exhibition. There was so much to see in the exhibition that it was so problematic for us. We had to move the VR outside of the space and set it up outside, so it was no longer curatorially embedded in the exhibition, which was really annoying, but we had to do it for the logistic issues. And what you'll know, upstairs we've just invested in 90 VR headsets, and that allows us to manage really a 60 audience capacity because we have to do charging and cleaning and sorting, and so that 90 is the rotational process for us, and that's kind of closer to the numbers we need to do. So we will have moments in a big institution where we can do the deep dives, and I kind of talk about programming as a T-shaped model. You do breadth and you do depth, and you need to get a balance of both of those models in terms of how you program. But for us, people were just frustrated because they were waiting, they were in line, they wanted to do that VR, they weren't seeing all the other opportunities and moments, they would just want that VR, you know. It was just like, I need to get the VR, and just a flood of feedback came in, and so we had to iterate, we had to put it outside, we had to get more VR headsets, and so that is an absolute challenge. So if someone came in with a piece, and in fact there was a work I really wanted to bring into the exhibition, which I would have much preferred than the ones I ended up with, but it needed a massive space and one person at a time, and we would, you know, in the end we ended up with 110,000 people that came through that exhibition, and the next one we're about to do, which I can't speak of because it's embargoed until next week, but you know, we're looking at 230,000 people coming through that exhibition. So that's, you know, that's basically 1,700 to 2,000 a day. So you can't, that's our challenge, that's our logistics. So we are investing in infrastructure that is more collective and can have that collective experience. So an immersive gallery is sometimes better than VR. When we do VR, we need 3 staff just to clean it, do the battery charging, sort out what's wigging out. We need a bit of tech. It's not simple, you know, and that is the challenge for the institution. So they're very likely to go, lovely VR, but it's really a one-person experience. We can't really make that work. So they're the sorts of things that you can do the research before you start thinking about what you're creating and why you're creating it. Then you're getting a sense of what is the challenges, and then you can, if you meet the challenges, the likelihood of you getting commissions, funding and investment gets better and better and better. And as I said, the opportunity is in the fact that there's so much infrastructure that's being built around immersive. Content is needed.
The role of there's many roles of the artist, right? And one of them would seem to be about something around using creative tools and knowledge to kind of criticise the systems we exist within. If in an industry model we're embedding the artist more in economic systems, how do we preserve that role to criticise that system if we're being more deeply embedded within it?
I guess it depends on what, absolutely there's the politics of criticism, but not many artists are going in there to criticise the administrative mechanics of how an art process is working,
thematically it might, you can still make big themes and ideas that you want to explore.
Yeah. So I guess it's finding that balance of you're still going to be tackling the issues and thinking about the creative content that you're interested in, but then it's also finding those alignments of where it's going to be presented. If you were going to make a work that was criticising Woodside, for instance, it's unlikely to get a presentation in the Woodside foyer. It's just not the right audience.
Not necessarily, actually.
Okay.
Doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean it's easy, but we do spend a bit of time jostling and, preserving the right for, having those difficult conversations regardless. To be honest, I have worked in institutions where it's a bit easier, but ultimately there is that desire, within our, here at Boola Bardip, it is definitely about,
it's one thing to do it
ideas.
Here, which is one step removed, but I guess it's like finding the space for that.
Yeah.
And finding where there is space to have those critical conversations, but also the partners that are coming on board are up for those critical conversations.
I was going to get us to do a task, but I've just realised how fast the time has run. So I think it would take too long to do that, but I will send, there's some great tools. There's a list of, current festivals and institutions that are, looking at immersive stuff. There's plenty in there, so I'm going to give you some resources of those. But that idea of market, we'll just talk a little bit about that, and also probably look at discussing, you understanding your market and why you would. So I would say one of the things that we experienced when people came into the accelerator was, I can only manage by what's out there and available funding, completely realistic. There's only funding moments there, that's it. And so I apply for a funding round. I'm successful, I'm not successful, I deal with that, I regroup. And it is a really hard process, and the courage that everyone has to take to regroup is remarkable. And that doesn't mean, when I'm going to say it, that doesn't change those sort of broader paradigms, but I think what our view is, in terms of accelerators, is starting to look at how you maximise those opportunities and how you can empower yourself through partnerships, through commissions, through funding, and even things like labs and accelerators. Because you may go through an accelerator, have to deal with some of those sorts of things, but what you're doing is you're meeting so many people along the way, all of which potentially become something for you at some stage. And that also understanding that those are long-term partnerships you're building. So it may not result in something immediately, but I can tell you it will result in things as you keep building. And so that longer-term purview is really useful to have when you're struggling through this process, because it is a struggle. I completely understand it. But what we're saying is it comes down to also doing a bit of research. So I was just sharing with Gemma that somebody came to pitch in an idea to me the other day, and they were so far down a pitch of a particular idea in a particular context that I just had to sort of stop them and say, we don't have any spaces for that, we couldn't do that, these are the reasons. However, when we get to this, we could have another conversation. And I just watched that person just find it really hard to backtrack from really pushing forward and pitching in the idea. When in fact, what the accelerators, we did a lot of work, was what was called in startup customer exploration. And that's kind of, a bit of a daggy term, but it's just researching. So finding me in an institution, saying, can I have a coffee? Coming and asking me about what's my infrastructure, what am I doing? No pitching, just what's there, what's available, what's happening, how do you do this, how do you do that, how does that work? Then you're starting to hear what the issues are and what the challenges are from an institutional perspective. And if you want to align, then that's good to know. So it's good to know that I don't necessarily, in our big exhibitions, we'll be very careful if we put AVR in there, because we've already had a really strong experience around how tricky that is for us. So finding out those things, and then you're building a relationship, so there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that, what we call that validation period, that first early period before you're jumping into, I've got this idea and who am I going to pitch it with? You go out and work out who's out there, what infrastructure do they have. You can do that internationally, you can do that nationally. In the market sizing that we were going to do an exercise, really looking at who's out there, what infrastructure they've got. If you're a VR person, you now know if I can do a work that is of interest to me and it's aligning to a sort of museum style. We've got here in the WA Museum, there's a few museums, so there's 8 all up. And then Australian Museum, usually we've just commissioned 3 works with White Spark Pictures. So Screen West, Screen Australia and the Museum Consortium gave production money, and then we're doing distribution and we're doing box office splits. So all of those different models really support that company in getting its first market. And they're doing their first market so that they can go into the cinema market. And that validation of meaning that they've got their content in a museum all of a sudden means that cinema are starting to show interest, because they've built a platform as well. So there's a few of those out there. It's 7.1 sound, and it's an event screening. It's a cinema screening of VR and if you've seen the VR Kimberley, that's the kind of model. So there's Auckland Museum, Australian Museum, all of the Western Australian museums, Museum Victoria just talking to us now about kind of coming into that model. Museum Victoria just put out a commission for artists for their digital space because they're looking for content. So keep an eye, research, know the institutions, know what they've got, just start knocking on doors, and then you're going to learn. It's not knocking, it's an introduction, but you're learning what have they got, what's their infrastructure, what type of work are they looking at, and before you even start.
Yeah, and those conversations really give you a lot more agency, because unlike a funding submission where you write the best pitch of your life and then submit it and then wait for months, or write to someone and hope they might reply, actually getting in and having those exploratory conversations gives you more ready feedback, so you can get a better understanding of what is going to fly and what's not going to fly, and how can you navigate that space to then put you in a better position, so that when you are applying you have that knowledge to build on, as opposed to just waiting for someone to give you the green light and give you a grant kind of thing.
And that exploration can go not just from institutions, that might be your endpoint, so your customer, if you like. Knowing who their customer is, so visitors, you need to know that as well. What are they like? What are they, what's data are you getting from how visitors are enjoying things like that stuff? Just explore that. Also, going to companies that you see yourself and go, that's a shape for me. One of the software artist developers in the Excel ended up getting onto TeamLab to really talk about pricing and their pricing models and all sorts of stuff like that, because they're trying to work out how did they price their work and what that was the top end, where did they go from there and where did they pitch themselves. So finding out, what other artists are charging, that's all really good research for yourself if you're in that position. Thinking about, if I do it for every hour that I've got, it's going to cost this, and no institution will pay for that. Or the top end I can actually price it higher than I am thinking I should be pricing. So all of those sort of basic business mechanics are really useful for you as an individual. I think we've run out of time. Sorry, we were going to do a practical exercise, but anyway. Thank you.